Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear and see me. I'm here out at my house in the Blue Ridge Mountain. I'm Dr. Stephen Greer, and I'm here with Jim Martin, who's Vice President of 1091, previously the Orchard that's distributing Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And we're going to have a conversation about a number of things for an hour or two, depending on just how long we want to go. So thank all of you for joining, and I want to thank the Moriartys for helping set this up. So hopefully everyone can hear me. They're training this old dog to do some new tricks with all this fancy schmancy stuff I've got here, but hopefully it's working, huh?
You look good, Dr. Greer.
Okay, so do you. So I'm here in near Charlottesville, Virginia, out in the country. I'm on a 65-acre farm. I always joke to people asking about coronavirus. I said, well, we're always socially distanced out here. The nearest place is half a mile away. But we're here with my wife and I are here with our two rescue dogs, Rosie and Chase. One is half pit bull and half lab that we rescued. And the other is half, we don't know what, border collie and lab. And I'm going to do a little PSA. Always rescue a dog, never purchase one. Thank you. So, I love dogs. So we're really going to cover some interesting things today. I have some show and tell. So one thing, just as a programming note for folks, later on as we get into this, I'm going to show people, send this out through your social media right now. I'm going to show something very, very cool that I got from a man who has since deceased, who was the senior scientist at the Naval Research Lab, and he had a meeting with an actual extraterrestrial who drew for him some kind of geometric form that's part of some energy and propulsion system. I have the 3D version of it that took them years to computer generate. I don't know if there are any left in the world, but I'm going to show you guys that because it's so beautiful and so cool. And then another couple of fun things. But first, I think we're going to start with an update about the pandemic and kind of go into some sort of practical things, since I'm an emergency doctor, so that you folks have a sense of really what you ought to be doing. Obviously, they're asking all of us to sort of self-isolate and socially distance, means 6 feet or more apart. It doesn't mean that you have to be under house arrest. It means that if you're out biking, hiking, running, whatever, that you're just a reasonable distance away from people, and pick routes where there aren't a lot of folks. If you can, if you're in Manhattan, that's probably harder to do, but certainly in a lot of cities, they're more remote places. The hand washing is still important, and the sanitization. The pandemic is probably going to go on for perhaps a year if we don't get a vaccine, because they're estimating 60% of all of us will get it at some point. But let me tell you what that means. It means that there is a 60% chance for the population as a whole to get it. So let's say in America, we have 340 million people. You can do the math. 0.6 times 340 is around 190 some or 200 million. What they're trying to do with this social separation is to be sure not, because it's so contagious. It's about 2 or 3 times as contagious as the flu. They just don't want everyone to get it all at once, because if they do, our systems for the healthcare system, which has not been set up for something like this, will be so overrun that people who are critically ill won't be able to get help in time to save them with a ventilator. So that's what the socially distancing is about. They use the term blunting the curve. It's not. It's actually stretching out the period. It's very unlikely that a vaccine will be around in time for it not to eventually go through this, through society. Everyone can hope they don't get it, but if you live a normal life, you may. Now, getting back to this statistic, as Mark Twain said, and I love the quote, there are liars, damn liars, in statistics. And the reason he sort of the wag that he was said that is because you can do anything with a statistic. But let me tell you as a doctor what that means. It means in an entire population, there's a 60% chance people will get it in general. It doesn't address you. So let's say you're not someone who is, you're retired, you're not going to rock concerts, you're not going to big events, or you're, some people live as virtual shut-ins. Their risk is much lower than someone, say myself, who's on planes all the time, in massive crowds all the time, hanging out with people in crowded venues and conferences and lectures all the time, where the likelihood of someone like me, I think, isn't 60%, it's probably 90+%. So part of what you have to do is assess a couple things. And this is where you get into, you're going to see the whole science doctor thing going here. You've got to think, what is my lifestyle? But also on top of that, what is my state of health? So if you have a general poor state of health for whatever reason, maybe you've had cancer and chemotherapy, maybe you have some underlying diseases, maybe you're a cigarette smoker, which is an enormous risk factor for this that they're not talking about. That all has to get factored into your own assessment of your risk, because none of us are a statistic. All of us are individual human beings. So that's where I'm trying to make this meaningful, where you kind of take the information and do your own assessment, risk assessment, depending on how you live, where you live, if you're in a hot zone like New York, or what your state of general health is. And then what can you do about your general state of health? We mentioned, I'm a little bit red. Someone mentioned last time, I've been trying to go out in the sun when we have, of course, in the mountains of the Blue Ridge here, if you have 2 sunny days in a row, you're dancing the Kazatska, you're excited. But I try to get out because you have a much better conversion and creation in your body from natural sunlight for 20 minutes or something, hitting your body, than taking a pill. The pills you take for vitamin D, which are found to be helpful for not only your immune system, but also preventing heart disease. Adequate vitamin D levels are important in staving off colon cancer very specifically. They found that people who live in far northern climes that are never out in the sun have a much higher rate of colon cancer and some of these other diseases than people in sunnier areas. So, but the conversion from sunlight hitting your skin to vitamin D is the most effective, much more so than a pill, most of which is excreted, quite frankly, and not absorbed and utilized. So, you don't want to get sun cancer. You don't want to get cancer from the skin and sun, but there's nothing wrong with being out and getting a reasonable amount of sun. And I remember reading about how Yogananda Paramahansa talked about how full body spectrum of the light of the sun, what he would call a sun bath, for like 15, 20 minutes was very, very good for the mind and the body together. Whereas being shut into an apartment or shut in someplace, never seeing the light of day, is bad for you physically and mentally. So I'm a big advocate of nature and the outdoors and a reasonable use of being out in the sun. Obviously, if you're going to be out for prolonged periods, use sunscreen and all that. But for a little while, you don't need much. You don't need much full body exposure to get good vitamin D. And vitamin C, it's not going to hurt you to take large amounts of vitamin C. But here's a caveat. My routine, not that it's anyone's business, but why not? We're here in my living room, is that I get up and only thing I have in the morning is water, orange juice, and a whole fresh orange. Why? And I'll take a vitamin C and also zinc. Zinc is very important in fighting viruses and infection because it helps the immune system fight off. You need zinc for your immune system. And even more so for males, for reasons that I won't go into on a public streaming setting, but you can guess. So it's very important. So I will take that, but I'll take it with the orange juice and the orange because there are cofactors, they're called, in the natural substances that are not in your vitamins that you need. So popping pills absent of a healthy diet is not going to be as effective as combining exercise with sunlight, with some vitamin supplements, but also a diet where you're a good fresh diet where you're getting the cofactors that enable those vitamins to work, because they don't work by themselves. They work with a whole lot of other things needing to be there with them. So a lot of people who think, oh, I'm going to be healthy, I'm just going to pop every kind of pill, they're actually not. They're not getting much benefit from that. They're spending a lot of money, but they're not getting the benefit. So, I was the founder of, and when I was in Asheville, North Carolina, the Shambhala Institute, which was a holistic health and healing center. I did this in my, I laugh now, spare time as an emergency doctor raising 4 children. But it was before I did all the things with CSETI and what have you. But I would teach people about this because most people don't know that. They're happy to go to a natural food store or wherever and get a bunch of pills, but they don't know that those pills aren't going to be very effective if you don't also do these other things that involve your diet, your exercise, and what we're going to get into in a little bit here is the power of the mind for healing and the power of the mind for the immune system being augmented and improved. So that's really important. Now, on the pandemic itself, of course, you've heard that the United States is now #1 in the world for a number of cases, even though China has 4 times the population of ours. And a great deal of that has to do with we are 3 months late, unfortunately, standing up our testing capability and therefore being able to smartly contain it. Because without testing, you don't know where the next hot zone is, because there's a lag time from the time that it's sort of in the community with people having minimal symptoms to the point where it surges on that big arc up like that. So because of the time lag from the time of exposure to symptoms and severe symptoms, and we didn't do any testing beginning in January, February, what have you, we're so far behind the curve. We're probably 2-3 months behind the wave. And that's just a complete failure of our public health and governmental systems in the United States. There's no other way to put it. You can't put lipstick on a pig. That's just the truth. So we are what we are. We do not have, this is my editorial comment for the day, maybe my only one. We don't really have a health care system. We have a health profit-centered industry. And I say this as an emergency doctor because I was in a big public hospital frontline, all the fun stuff, shootings and stabbings and car wrecks and burns and massive heart attacks and code blues for people in cardiac arrest and all that stuff. But what I have told people is that we have to understand that over the last 20 years or so, it's become more and more oriented towards squeezing every drop of efficiency, maximizing efficiency, and squeezing out any excess capability. Now, what does that mean? Let's take New York State, for example. In the last couple of decades, they've lost 20,000 hospital beds just because they've closed down to make hospitals more profitable, the system more profitable for the stakeholders, whether it be whoever it is. So this is a peculiar and unfortunate situation in America that we all have to acknowledge. We're not going to change that tomorrow. We may need to change that going forward down the road, simply because we also we have what's just in time supply chains. Now, let me explain what that means. So if you're like a manufacturer of widgets, little devices, it used to be you would have warehouses full of the parts you would need and stock them up. They found they could make more profit if they didn't have to store a lot of things, but they had an ordering system that was digitized and computerized where things arrived every single day just as you need it. It cut down on warehouse space, tying up of money and inventory, on and on and on. And from a manufacturing point of view, you can't argue with the economics of that. However, when you're talking about healthcare. And a medical catastrophe, a pandemic or some other thing, a massive earthquake that would hit California or some other place or what have you, that's a very bad policy. It makes more money for the healthcare corporate, money whores, I call them, I'm sorry to say. But that's really who runs our system. Our system is not run in the interest of the people and the public, or the doctors or the nurses who are now dying because of this, trying to take care of people. It's run for the benefit of the corporate for-profit stakeholders. That's not a political statement. It's a statement of fact. And that's why, for example, Switzerland, which is hardly a developing country, it's not, the Congo, spends 50% on the dollar, half as much as America does per person in healthcare, and have better outcomes and a better system. So we're paying twice as much as Switzerland and have worse outcomes and have no capabilities. But that's because it isn't oriented towards you and me, or me as a doctor and you as a patient having the best situation. It's oriented towards squeezing the maximum amount of money from people who care about one thing, the almighty dollar. So that you have to understand that is, if you're in America, and it's not that it's a pretty picture in Italy either, or Spain, but if you're in America, that is our system. That's the model for our system. And you have to understand that to understand what we're going to go through. It's a direct result of the fact that it's really not geared towards public health and the patient. It's geared towards profits. Yeah. All right. So, and I'm not saying this is a political thing. I'm just telling you these are the facts. As a doctor who's worked in that system, I think everyone on the front lines of medicine are now realizing this. Even in other countries that have more publicly supported systems, people don't realize 14% of coronavirus cases in Spain are healthcare workers. 1 in 7, 1 out of every 7. So people, I'm retired from medicine right now. I may get recruited back in, but if there's a bad enough emergency here, but because I'm still licensed and keep my DEA number and all that stuff. But I'm not in a hospital right now, but that's amazing. When you think that 1 in 7 cases in a place like Spain are the healthcare workers. In America, it could get that bad also because we don't have enough personal protective equipment for them. There are doctors who are using for an entire week one of those masks, which should be used once and thrown away because they have to. And of course, those things are just laden with the virus. So the problem with that, which is really bad, I have a son-in-law who's actually a medical resident, and there's not protective gear in a lot of these hospitals for these doctors. And the risk of that, of course, is that it means that they could get infected. But if they get sick, I don't know which is the worst scenario. They get sick and they're taken out of rotation, so they can't help people. Or they're not sick, but they're carrying the virus and spreading it to everybody because there isn't enough testing to even test the doctors and the nurses. So this is a situation which I'm not trying to depress people at all. We'll get to more inspiring ideas in a moment. I'm just trying to, I'm an emergency doctor. If you come into my ER with a brain tumor, I'm not going to tell you have a migraine. You're going to get plain talk from me no matter what. Jim will tell you I'm like that. But what it means is that we do have to be careful. We have to understand the systems can get overrun. But that eventually, if we can get the supply chain stood up, but it's lagging about 3 months late right now, then we can move on where we'd have enough testing. Now, on the good news, it just announced last night, there's a company that has a 15-minute test now that they're going to start distributing next week. They're going to try to create 50,000, I think, of those tests pretty quickly, and then stand it up to perhaps maybe millions. Yeah. The other thing that's working on, although I don't think it's been cleared yet, is an antibody test. Now, what is that? What's the difference between the coronavirus testing they're doing now, even the fast one, and an antibody test? So just to give you a little bit of insight on this, the coronavirus test that everyone's getting now is actually testing for the live virus. They're actually testing for the virus. An antibody test would test for your body's antibodies that are created to fight the virus. So what that would mean is that if we had widespread antibody testing, we may find that there are millions of people who have been exposed, who had minimal or no symptoms, who are pretty immune and could get out back in the workforce, help other people, etc. So the emergence of an antibody test, particularly if it's widely available, and better yet, I would recommend a home test. During the HIV epidemic, they developed a home test where you could test at home, not even go out of your house, and test and know the results. So that's something that if that could get created would be a big, I think, game changer, because if we find that there's large numbers of people who are already have been exposed, but they don't have the live virus. So if you had an antibody test that said, yeah, you've been exposed, but then secondarily got a test to see if the virus is still in you, and it isn't, if it's not in you as a live virus, but you have the antibodies, you could go out and do everything and not have to be worried that you're going to be exposed because you already have been, but didn't have very bad symptoms. So you would be a very safe person also to interact with other people, because you're not going to be carrying the virus and spreading it around to, say, high-risk populations who might need to have things done at home for them, et cetera, and so on. So I'm just giving you this as a medical update of things that are emerging. And we hope that the medical science, and more importantly, a coordinated global response to the supply chain and manufacturing of these things gets stood up. One of the ironies of this is that this 15-minute test that's coming out, you have to have those, nasal swabs that you see people getting swabbed, and there's a shortage of those. Now you can believe that, basically a fancy Q-tip. For lack of a Q-tip, fancy Q-tip, has to be a specific thing in a material you put it in that, that preserves the virus for the test, has to be in some kind of a solution. But there aren't enough of those. So we're running out of those, which is not high tech at all, which is going to also slow down the testing because there aren't enough of these components you need to gather the test. All of this needs to be coordinated. Unfortunately, I don't know, in other countries in the United States, coordination, logistics, all of that have completely imploded into chaos. And so this is why we don't have the personal protective equipment, PPE. It's why we don't have enough swabs. There aren't enough test kits. There aren't enough ventilators. And these are all things that should have been stood up in January and February. And now we are almost April. So looking down the road, all those things could really be game changers as they come online. Until then, we need to just kind of like use this as an opportunity to appreciate life and make lemonade out of the lemons we've been given.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Dr. Greer. And I also just wanted to add to your message that we will be doing a live meditation at the end of this event. Dr. Greer will be leading us in that meditation for everyone who's tuning in. Spread that around. We're going to be talking for a while, sharing current events, but then we will be coming into group coherence and a group meditation. So Dr. Greer, before we go on too much, I do want to pepper certain questions in from the—
Great, sure, shoot.
And there's so many conspiracy theories going on right now. I think some of the best things you can do is kind of address them, debunk, or say, give us some insight into what's true, what's not.
Right.
So, okay, our first question is from Chadwin Taylor 4, and he says, based on your sources, could COVID-19 be the preliminary step toward a major false flag event? Now, I know you and I have discussed this on the ET side. What do you think in regards to the COVID virus?
Well, I think that it could be. My biggest concern in the last week or so is that there have been a number of people using the language in editorials, pundits, news anchors, talking about how we're at, quote, war with an alien thing, literally. I mean, that Neil deGrasse Tyson, whatever his name is, who's an acolyte of the secret government, denying UFOs are real. He's a famous astronomer, alleged astronomer. And what he said literally was that this is like invading space aliens. Then there was an editorial I read recently where the manager-in-chief, editor-in-chief of this magazine stated that we can now all unite against a common enemy, using exactly Werner von Braun's words when he said they're going to use the ET issue so that people can unite against a common alien enemy. I mean, it's virtually word for word, just take virus out and put in alien. Now, is this being done deliberately? It could be. Or it could be that the coronavirus went out and got loose, and the people who are wanting to script this future false flag operation are making their own lemonade out of these limits, right, and doing their own narrative and creating their own message. To be honest with you, I'm very concerned about that, because there are enough things about this that do not add up from a public health and rational point of view.
Right.
If you want to Google, Thomas Friedman at the New York Times wrote an article about, in conjunction with this Yale professor of epidemiology, that it talks about the fact that a lot of what we're doing in terms of shutting down our whole civilization doesn't really make a lot of sense. It makes you wonder how much of this is being abused by powers that be, who quite frankly, want to experiment with how much can we control the masses? How much can we control the media through fear? How much can we unite people around a common enemy that's a global threat? But it wouldn't be far to go from that to the next thing, that there's an alien threat, which of course we've already seen agents of the CIA and DIA and aerospace industry working with the TTSA have already put that out there. You know, they put a little snippet of evidence out, and the Disclosure Project has things 1,000 times more impressive than the Tic Tac they chased off the coast of California. But they'll feature that because the narrative attached to it is it's a threat to our national security. I remember a couple of years ago, about the time that Unacknowledged was hitting hundreds of millions of views on platforms, legal and illegal, all over the world, that became the whole lockstep messaging of the mainstream media around the UFO issue. And it was all anchored in it being a threat. And I remember people who took our top secret military witnesses who had been at intercontinental ballistic missile facilities, ICBM, nuclear launch facilities, where there had been ET craft that had disabled the launch capabilities. And the men that were in those silos told me they felt the ETs were saying, please don't destroy this beautiful planet. But if you go to a mutual assured destruction, full out launch, we could shut those systems down because the earth is too beautiful and sacred to let you people in one generation destroy it.
Right. When
it should be here for hundreds of thousands of years for the evolution of intelligent conscious life in the cosmos. So but those people who are in the UFO subculture hijacked these military witnesses we had identified, bundled them back together, put them on the stage, did a documentary, had them on Larry King, had them on all these news programs saying, look, the aliens have invaded our nuclear facilities and are in fact a threat to our national security and the readiness of our nuclear arsenal. When in reality, the ETs were saying and this is what they told me, these men who were there, but the spinmeisters who did this spun it in this direction of, oh, it's a threat, it's an existential threat. So you can take, and I talk about this briefly in the film Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, that's coming out in about 10 days on April 7th. Oh, by the way, you guys, all of you can pre-order it on now Amazon, iTunes, and Vimeo. And it's great if a lot on iTunes, because then they track the numbers, and maybe we can open as #1 in the world. That will really push this out. So those of you who want to get this, do a pre-order like that, it'd be great. Now, I've heard today from my wife that people can't get it on Amazon internationally. I don't know what's wrong. I don't know if it's only available in the US on Amazon, but I know iTunes should be worldwide. Is that right, Jim?
That's right, Dr. Greer. iTunes is worldwide, as is Vimeo. Amazon is only in the US on pre-order. However, on street date, it will be live in the international territories.
Okay, so Amazon's on the date, what he calls street date. This is all lingo in Hollywood. Nobody knows what street date is, but the date released on the 7th. Amazon will be everywhere, but for pre-order only in US.
That's
but
right.
iTunes and Vimeo you can do anywhere in the world. But the more that's happening on, say, iTunes, where the numbers get very high, if we can open as #1 in the world, what that means is then it will really help push it out there so that we begin to get this out to hundreds of millions of people eventually. So that's where you guys can help by doing that for us and, going and putting in a pre-order. What was I talking about before I got distracted? Oh, about this whole question this guy had. I think that's really a good question, because I think a lot of people that I just bump into as I go and get groceries, they kind of say to me, they sense there's some other agenda. And I'm not trying to create a conspiracy thing here that's wackadoo. I just know I've lived long enough with, look, the National Press Club event in 2001 resulted in almost 1 billion people saw that. Hundreds of thousands of people were writing to members of Congress in the United States and Parliament in the UK and elsewhere, demanding that there be a hearing, that this be opened up. 4 months later, 9/11 happened. And then I have a man who was in the vice president's office, Cheney at the time, who, after he was there, was confided and shared with us that the plans for that he saw prior to 9/11 in the vice president's office. Now, I don't say that with any joy. I've known that since it happened. I haven't talked about it much, but I know what these USAPs, these unacknowledged special access projects, are capable of. Now, does that change anything we're going to do? No. It just means that we have to have our eyes wide open and then do exactly what we're planning to do. One of the things that is the hardest part of doing the work we're doing is to not get distracted into these conspiracies or pulled into that darkness. That's the bait they want you to take. They want people to be sitting in their houses by themselves, quivering in fear, instead of coming together in an expanded state of consciousness and working together in a peaceful way. Don't give them that victory. Do not give them that victory. That's what they want. They want us to be afraid. They want us to be united only through fear or hatred or a common enemy or what have you. They don't want humans to be united in a sense of our spiritual deep oneness in consciousness, or in peace, or in something that could heal the planet and get rid of poverty and get rid of fossil fuels through Disclosure Project, helping to bring out these technologies that have been sequestered for 100 years. They want everyone to behave out of this sort of coward, beaten down state of fear where we're shut down. And what we need to do, I have to understand, even our immune systems, our mind, our body, our consciousness is all healed by opening up like a lotus, not shutting down with darkness. So I think that regardless of what these psychopaths are doing, what I've learned to do through my lifetime is to stay with the vision. What is our vision? Our vision is a new world. Our vision is universal peace, which is actually what this says. One universe, one people. The foundation of that is universal peace. And that is born out of universal cosmic consciousness and the experience of that deep spiritual conscious connection that all life and all humans have. It's beautiful. So I think we should be really, the more there are these challenges in the external world, the more it ought to be an impetus and a call to action for us to discover our inner world and to connect through inner states of consciousness and higher states of consciousness, because that's the solution, not having folks running around terrified. So I think there's a certain kind of beauty. I always recall, the story. I don't know if everyone remembers Mahatma Gandhi's life. If you've never seen the movie Gandhi, go see it. It's amazing, one of the best. And when he, was doing his work, it was very dangerous. And of course, eventually he was assassinated. I mean, but when he was killed, it was a religious fanatic, a Hindu nationalist, who killed him because he was trying to make peace amongst the Muslims, the Hindus, the Zoroastrians, all the different people who are in India. And this person was so furious that he was out getting ready. He was outside of his house at some event, and there was this man that leapt forward and shot him. But the last thing he did was to bless him as he went down, and kind of blessed and forgave the person who assassinated him, because he was staying in that state of higher consciousness. And so that's kind of an exemplar. That's sort of, I mean, it's a true story. It's not from 2,000 years ago. It happened in the 1940s. I think India was founded in 48 or around there, late 40s. And so this is in relatively recent human history as an example of what all of us should at least aspire to be, so that we stay in that state within ourselves, no matter what the vicissitudes are and the challenges and the scary stuff that people do. So instead of reacting with fear, react with love, and not react, but go to a place of love and inner peace, and then help other people to the extent you can when you're socially isolated. Help get the truth out to people. Do something that is beyond just yourself. Because what you find is that people, the more they shut down, the more they're just focusing on themselves. And the more they do that, the more depressed they are. However, if they open up their heart and open up their mind and connect with other people and connect it and figure out how they can help, that's actually a source of great joy and peace. And also, you're not just absorbed thinking about your own situation, which is very important to do in a time like this. Is we should be thinking about, what can we do for others? What can we do for our loved ones? But also neighbors. If there's a person who's a shut-in, or there's a man not far from us that his little house is on about 6 inches from the edge of my property line, head south. And I was out hiking and I saw him and I said, "Do you need anything?" I stayed a certain distance. He's probably close to 90, and he lives in this place by himself. Well, there are a lot of people like that. So those are little things everyone can do. Why not? Observing certain protocols not to possibly infect someone of that age and what have you. But, he was a very, very sweet man, was very grateful. And it turned out his back fence neighbor, they had been looking in on him and helping him get things. So, they're beautiful things that we can turn into a situation like this. And I think that's much more healing for us personally, but as a civilization, than running off into fear-based conspiracy stuff. It's not that I'm not going to ignore these possibilities that this man asked about, but I think, unfortunately, most people stop there. No, it's just to say, yes, humans have always done, man's inhumanity to man. And there have always been sociopaths and psychopaths that are demagogues that try to get power over lots of people. Virtually every leader in history, with a few exceptions. So I think we have to go, well, what do we do? And I think it isn't about what is someone else doing. That's not the question. What am I going to do? What is our community going to do? What is the CE5 community going to do? And so I think that to the extent we put our focus on something edifying and beautiful and healing, not only will it be beneficial to everyone, it'll be beneficial to us personally.
I agree, Dr. Greer, and well said. And it is true, CE5 empowers the individual. It lets you take, the power back into your own hands and to go out and make contact on your own. And as we all come together, I think we all realize this positive shift. But there's so many questions coming in. I want to keep moving because so many people are eager to hear your
I should make my answer shorter. I'm not good at that.
No, we please carry on as long as you can. We appreciate it. So we have a really great question here from Philip James, one of the producers on CE5. What up, Philip?
Hey, Philip. Great.
Can you share, Dr. Greer, some of your inside info you've received from your sources on the virus? I know you've received a lot of intel that you can't necessarily disclose, but can you give the public a briefing on what might be going on behind the scenes?
Well, what's going on behind the scenes are things that I really can't talk about on a channel like this without getting banned. I know what it is. I know the who, the what, the where. It isn't changing anything that I'm going to do or that you should do. I will say that if it's handled improperly, it could lead to World War III. So I think that we need to be careful. I understand the responsibility that I have. But I'll just say that this is probably going to be something that we're going to have to be dealing with for a year or more till there's a vaccine. There are a lot of twists and turns that can happen in society, our country, as well as others in that period that we have to be mindful of. Where there could be, civil unrest or martial law imposed, something worse than the lockdown we're all under now. And so I think that we have to be mindful of our freedoms and liberties and not behave in a way that leads to us acting that in a way that justifies these power-hungry people to clamp down more. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. We have to be mindful that every whatever people start doing, if it's incoherent, violent, whatever, could lead to replay right into their playbook, right into their strategy. So I think that we have to be very smart and not do things that go into their strategy. A good example of this to make it real is that after 9/11, everybody was in such a panic that we passed something called the Patriot Act in the U.S. Congress and Senate House that no member of the Congress read, that allowed for unbelievable, warrantless searches and total intrusiveness from the National Security Agency into our lives and what have you. And no one did anything about it because people were so afraid and were so concerned with security that they were willing to give up all their liberty and freedom. So I think that we have to be mindful of that, and we have to be mindful that we behave in a way that's peaceful and orderly, but also meaningful, where we sort of don't respond in a way they may want us to. There may be some of these USAPs that want us to respond in a way that would play right into their hands. Does that make sense?
100%.
Okay, that's really, I think, what we have to be careful of. The other thing is that there could be some very good therapies coming along for this. There could be a vaccine sooner than we think. There's a German company that apparently may be close. We have to be very hopeful of that. But in the meanwhile, no matter what the twists and turns and how all this plays out, behave in a way that's going to be positive, orderly, coherent, spiritually minded, helping others, and not devolve as a civilization into behaviors that might justify further, for lack of a better term, fascistic responses, clamping down responses on people's personal liberties and freedoms. I think that's very, very important, actually.
Yeah, well said, Dr. Greer. So that actually kind of leads into our next question. And I do want to remind everyone that we will be doing a live meditation here at the end of this live stream. So please tune in for that. Dr. Greer will be holding a live meditation. We want everyone to tune in. Yes. Moving on, we have a question here from Bella, and she says, is the coronavirus extraterrestrial in origin to raise our consciousness and bring humanity together? Or is this an attempt from the shadow government to try and curtail the world's population? Another Illuminati-style question, Dr. Greer, but there's a lot of them out there. What are your thoughts?
It's certainly not of extraterrestrial origin. If it were something that was of a human origin, then, if anyone who there's a mainstream magazine called The Week, which is a summary of news from around the world that comes out weekly. And the one that I just received has, they just sort of summarize news articles from mainstream media all around the world. and I like it because it's well written and it's representative across the spectrum for mainstream information, not this sort of information. But they had an article that I just read last night before I went to bed. Of course, I didn't go to bed till about 5 a.m., but my typical night owl thing. But it was an article about how the spokesman for the Foreign Ministry of China has stated that this coronavirus was actually a U.S. biowarfare weapon that was in places in the U.S. and then was brought to Wuhan. I've heard other people who are U.S. government scientists claim it was a Chinese one. So here you have this starting. But this was in the mainstream press. I'm not saying anything to the YouTube censors. I'm not saying anything that's not been in the mainstream press that was stated by the Foreign Ministry of China's spokesperson, official spokesperson. Now, if you know China, someone like that doesn't say something to the public without it being cleared from way high, okay, in China, because it's a very top-down government. Therefore, that's already being bandied about. And, you know, the more that does get out, the more that could actually create a lot of international problems. Yeah. I mean, you can imagine, I mean, countries have unfortunately gone to war over less than something that kills thousands or millions of people and shuts down an entire economy. So we have to be careful whether there's any evidence for that or not. We have to be careful in how we respond to it, both as a nation, but also individually. I think that whatever it is, we have to say we are not going to respond the way these unacknowledged special access projects want us to. Because usually the human response is reflected in that question, this us versus them, right. ET versus humans, China versus US, this versus that, tribalism, tribalism, tribalism forever.
Right.
All right. That's what they want. That's the bait that I was talking about. That's on the hook. They want us to take the bait and get hooked into that. And I would caution everyone listening and everyone you know, not to take that bait, because that is the predictable response of humans, because we've evolved over, you know, hundreds of thousands of years, where the foundation, unfortunately, of much of our society's organizing is one tribe against another tribe, right. Whether it be, you know, a race, an economic system, a country, a city state back in the old days, or an old-fashioned tribe. All right, one tribe against another. That is hardwired, unfortunately, into the human psyche, which has been traced to the fact that we're 98% genetically identical to chimpanzees that do the same thing. The spiritual consciousness we have is the only thing that's going to save us from devolving into these tribal conflicts, no matter how petty or how huge. And that's why I tell people, at the core of the human crisis, whether it's this moment in time or looking over the last few millennia, the only way we're going to go forward, since we're a high-tech civilization with weapons that could destroy the entire planet, is that we spiritually go beyond these sort of predictable, tribalistic us versus them ways of thinking. And go into a state where we're in a deep cosmic consciousness that transcends all that noise. Because then we're going to be wise enough to see the bait when it is put in front of us and not take it. We're going to be wise enough to avoid taking the bait. Well, and that's the dawn of wisdom. So, you know, information is not whatever is out there. Knowledge is rarer. Wisdom is the rarest. Wisdom comes from a combination of deep spirituality and experience and knowledge all coming together. So we have to begin to attain wisdom as a civilization.
Well, I really appreciate that answer. And I think that even segues into us talking a little bit about the movie Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which of course is all about the individual learning to make contact on their own and getting rid of this fear threat. Because as you do see vibe and you experience this phenomenon yourself, you realize that it is there to make contact. It's there to interact. It is not an issue of fear or an aggressive force. Now, I want to segue into this because you get into this in the movie, this issue of To the Stars Academy. I know you mentored Tom DeLonge when he was coming up in the UFO game. It seems like he kind of changed his stance to push this fear-based agenda. All of us in the UFO community are a little bit surprised about that. Do you care to comment on TTSA and just this fear, agenda that they're pushing in the media?
Yeah, well, it's certainly, you can go and Google and find online, who the people are as part of TTSA. They're all CIA and other intelligence operatives. There's a huge number of them, and kind of spooky, that are virologists, interestingly enough. But I think that whether you're talking about, Semivan or Put Off, or the people who have done work with, Kit Green and others, many of those people I know personally since the 90s have been at the core of the majority intelligence community, MAGIC, which is the sort of operating umbrella for the unacknowledged special access projects. I think Tom is a well-meaning person and sincere, who was targeted by some people who were senior enough that he was impressed by them, and they were able to, unfortunately, seed him with ideas and brainwash him into this direction. I don't think that he understands that there's so much disinformation that has been manufactured that you can be shown privately that would convince you of what his convictions are. But those have been manufactured by counterintelligence people.
Right.
So I look at that in a way, it's very frustrating, because I'd say, and this is the sad part of what I've done for the last 30 years, probably 90+% of all celebrities, VIPs, politicians, world leaders that I've introduced to this subject have then secondarily, first through, unfortunately, Googling on the internet, and then if they're powerful enough or can influence an influencer, let's say, they are then targeted by people who put them under their umbrella, under their cape, and give them disinformation that's extremely convincing to turn them over to this perspective of it being an alien threat.
Yeah.
I've seen this happen. If I've seen it happen once with Tom DeLonge, I've seen it happen probably 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And that includes, government officials and others. And actually, the thing that's kept me awake the most over the last 30 years is that, what the hell am I doing? Because it's so easy to trigger. It's like a PTSD thing. We sort of have an unspoken PTSD as a tribalistic warring society. It's so easy to trigger that us versus them response in human. And that's at the root what we're trying to go beyond. And the only way to go beyond that is that somebody would experience this state, this unitive state, the state of consciousness that is this singularity that is within every single person. And the only way to do that is, that expression, but know thyself and to thine own self be true. And so to know yourself, you have to meditate and go into this deep, quiet place. But there's this other beautiful quote from the old Persian. Thinkest thyself a puny form when within thee the universe is folded? It's a rhetorical question. So in other words, it's Old English. But do you think yourself just to be a small thing when in reality, the entirety of the universe is folded within every single individual human and every single individual ET? So what that means is that if we understand that we are a conscious quantum hologram, where the entirety of all that exists and has ever existed and will ever exist is actually folded within the fabric of consciousness within us. That if the more we go into deeper and deeper levels of consciousness, the more we can attain not only the vision and be seers, what pop culture calls remote viewing, but also know the reality of the past, have glimpses into the future, know the reality of what's going on right now, and be guided with knowledge and wisdom. So this is really important. It isn't that we shut off our mind or our intellect or the scientific or objective ways of getting knowledge. We add that, which is a very Western construct, to this ancient construct that all native peoples and the foundations of all religions understood before they got ruined, is that within each person is this great spirit that is folded. And as we connect to that great spirit, we can not only know things within ourselves. There's in the Sanskrit, because I used to be a teacher of Sanskrit and the Vedas and meditation before I was a medical doctor. I say in my misspent youth, instead of dropping acid and chasing skirts in the 60s and 70s, I was meditating 6-8 hours a day in meditation centers and doing this stuff. But it was great. I'm glad I did it before I went to medical school. But what's fun about that is that when you realize that you really don't need much to do that, you have to have a certain discipline, you have to have a certain knowledge, and you need some kind of starting off technique to start with, which is what I teach on the CE5 initiatives. Now, I teach a number of things, breathing techniques, pranayama, mantra, and there are other ways to do it. We had a member of our CE5 team in Los Angeles, where you are, back in the I'd say early mid 90s. And it was a medical doctor, or a large number of medical doctors doing CE5, because I'm a doctor, so I've made it okay, because it's not okay to do this stuff. So I can kind of like model that for other physicians. Sure. I kind of joke about how humans kind of need someone to make it okay for them by doing it first. That's another human trait that I find very curious, because I've never been like that. I do what I think is right. I don't care what anyone thinks. And I've just been like that since I was in 4th grade, I guess. But what happened is that she was a harpist. She had a harp, beautiful. And she would play the tones of that harp and would get into a brainwave and a movement with it where she transcended and had these amazing experiences in higher consciousness through the harp. Mm. So I tell people that's where you have to kind of know yourself. Not everyone wants to sit for hours in a meditative state, but there are other things. You need to explore your own reality and know that. I like saying it this way. This state of cosmic consciousness, this samadhi state, is like the calm center of the hub of the wheel of life, of existence. But if you look at Earth, and there are 8 billion people on Earth, in reality, there are 8 billion unique spokes or pathways into that hub. Now, there are certain basic things I can teach as a teacher, and I've been doing this since I was 18, 19 years old, and I'll be 65 in June, Lord mercy. But I think that, Lord have mercy, North Carolina roots showing. So I think that if we understand that we are all unique, that no two souls are identical, even identical twins. And so there is a unique path for each of us to get to that hub of inner peace, unbounded mind. The beginning of ignorance and the beginning of the end of all religions and all spiritual traditions, it's when they become chauvinistic and bombastic, and it's this way or the highway. When in reality, because that leaves out the nuance of the individual who has to take whatever I can share with everyone. I've said this my entire life, and a lot of people who are in organizations that I've been part of hate for me to say this. You take it, you learn it, you make it your own. Yeah. And that's the best thing a teacher can do, is give you that knowledge and give you some starting off points. But ultimately, you and your girlfriend and everyone has to find a way to make whatever are some of the standard teachings, let's call it, and make it your own and make it effective. Now, with that said, there are clearly some techniques that are, like, let's call it the super highway to getting there to the hub. Right. And that's what I try to teach. Mm-hmm. People who come on these week-long expeditions that we do, many who have been in meditation training programs for 20, 30 years, gain more in 1 week than they do in 20 years. And I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you, because it's a very powerful, maybe at some point we can do a whole bunch of these on YouTube so that, you know, we do this for millions of people. But I think that's really powerful. There are powerful techniques, but ultimately you're going to make it your own. So you need to read the book of your own soul.
Well said, Dr. Greer. Well said. So yeah, I just want to follow up on that point and a couple other stories you told me before. You know, one, how CE5 was really the emphasis that kicked off the Disclosure Project, and that's CE5 you had in Florida back in the 90s was what was the catalyst for the intelligence agencies approaching you. Do you mind commenting about that to the fans today?
Yeah, I know, because my reality is a different reality than the public perception of all this. So one of the things I find sort of sometimes aggravating, but understandable, is that people think the Disclosure Project and the work done in that area was the primary focus of what we've been doing. It was actually an accident of history. So in 1990, when I started this, the CE5 initiative, it was initially under the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. That's now become SeriousDisclosure.com and all that. I was only doing this to teach people to be human ambassadors using consciousness and higher states of consciousness to other civilizations, and teaching people the science of consciousness, the meditative approach, remote viewing, and then not just viewing, but turning it into an active system called coherent thought sequencing, where you can, once you see the craft or an ET, you then welcome them and guide them exactly to where you're located. You vector them in, like you would be guiding a plane to land at an airport, you know, or something, through your visualization and vision. And that if you do that in a constant, coherent stream of consciousness with clear intent to do it for peaceful purposes, to be an ambassador from humans to their people, to do it for positive reasons and not selfish reasons, not self-aggrandizing reasons, not to be entertained by lights in the sky, not to get their technology so we can have more military weapons, but doing it really from a pure-hearted place. If you combine the pure-heartedness and intent with the technique, this is going to be an outrageous statement to people who don't know me and haven't been on these shows. We have never, ever done this as a group and not had UFOs, ET craft, ET beings appear. Never. If not once, dozens of times on an expedition, sometimes hundreds of times. So it absolutely works. And it works because these extraterrestrial civilizations that are also interdimensional or transdimensional, all their communication technologies are working through consciousness and coherent thought that's very organized and clear, not just scattered whatever, but a clear intent. So being coherent in deep consciousness and making that connection, people say, oh, you're just calling them, come on down. You know, no, that's not what we're doing. No, I mean, that's the hillbilly version of it, I guess. But what we're really doing is very respectful. We're asking the ETs to join with us as a civilization. And we're doing it not only for selfish purposes, but for the betterment of the world and the betterment of their civilizations as well, as sort of a cultural exchange. And so that's what they're waiting for. They're waiting for spiritually minded people who aren't doing this for primitive, selfish reasons to reach out to them. So we did that. And you know, I started the project in 1990. And then by 1992, I decided I would do a few things with a larger group. So I did this event for, I think it was a weekend in Pensacola in March of 92. And we did the meditation. We did it the afternoon. I was teaching meditation and remote viewing. And every night we would go out under the stars on this beach. And sure enough, 4 ET craft popped in. They got photographed, put in the front page of the Pensacola paper. I forget the name of the paper. And immediately the intelligence community reached out to me. And they reached out because they were I call them the white hats, were very excited that we were doing this and had discovered it. The black hats were pissed off, and they were very upset that, in fact, we were doing this and went off out of their control, because they knew that this was the tantamount to the Rosetta Stone of communicating with interstellar civilizations. They knew this. Because remember, like Russell Targ, who's in this movie, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, we hope to have him on one of these live YouTube events soon, was, for 20 some years doing consciousness remote viewing with the CIA and Stanford Research. And he's a physicist, PhD physicist, brilliant man, and very pure-hearted man. And he states that this was being done, but it had been done for long before he got involved.
Right.
And so there's really good evidence that even in World War II, there were people that were engaged to do, let's call it spycraft, on both sides, who had these consciousness, some would say psychic abilities. It's really just innate abilities that everyone has. And because of that, there was this enormous sort of opening up of abilities to gather information, not using even electronic systems, just using consciousness. Now, they also knew from the 40s and 50s that ET spacecraft and beings had this ability innately, but they also added it one more step. They had technologies, little devices that look like your cell phone, that were actually turned on and off and done by looking at it with your conscious intention going there and turning it on.
Wow.
Okay. So that's what ETs have. Now, classified projects have similar things. I don't have those. I've been offered one. I didn't want to take it because I think it would cost me my life, and it would have. But what I'm saying is that we can do this innately. As humans, we can do this innately. But you need to understand, on the other side of that signal, let's say we're making a connection with our consciousness and mind and thought. But on the other end, you have very advanced civilizations that have not only the innate abilities we do, and even more, because they've been developed for hundreds of thousands, millions of years longer than we have, but they also have technologies that precisely interface with thought, quanta of thought, meaning everything. And these are technologies, these are physical technologies. So when you understand that, then you understand why the CE5 protocols work so well.
Right.
All right. And that's what this movie is sort of a primer for hundreds of millions of people, I hope, to understand the science of consciousness. And not only what are we doing with CE5, but how does it work? Why would it work? And this is where we get into whole science of consciousness experiments that are in this Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind documentary. I think it's going to collect a lot of dots for people. And what Michael Mazzola and I tried to do with this is take it as far as we could, and not lose people within a 2-hour feature film.
Yeah.
Because, it's fine to reach a few 100,000 people this way, but we really need to reach a few 100 million people.
Yeah.
Okay. To do that, and thanks to what you're doing, you were a producer on this and helping get the word out. If we reach that number of people, then we can hit that 1% Maharishi effect, where our whole civilization advances in a quantum moment, a very quick phased transition, it's called, that I spoke of last week. So that's what very, very much is exciting about this documentary, and that in reality, Unacknowledged and the Disclosure Project were outgrowths of the fact that I realized back in, I guess, about 1992, 93. And I think my sort of old Southern expression, coming to Jesus moment, was briefing the director of the CIA. I mean, those of you who are in your 30s, imagine being in your 30s, being called up to Washington. And I'm working full-time as an emergency doctor to brief the sitting director of the CIA, because he had been denied access to these projects, as had his president, which at that time was Bill Clinton. I was in a state of utter shock. It's one thing to see this stuff on a conspiracy YouTube, whatever, or some History Channel thing. It's another thing when you're sitting with the director of the CIA as a person and realizing that this ain't no conspiracy theory. This is really fucked up, excuse my language, but it is a mess. And so that's when I realized we have to do something about this. Now, between 93 and 98, I had hoped, we continued to do Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind all over the world. As you know, this logo occurred in England in July of 1992, because a group of us, about 12 of us, went up to Woodborough Hill and near Alton Barnes. And we were meditating, and I knew the actual intelligences making the real crop circles that weren't hoaxed. Unfortunately, now there's probably 80% hoaxed, but the real ones were very highly intelligent, interstellar, transdimensional. So we went up there, and we didn't, as a group, we didn't know what we were going to do till we got there. When we got up there, I said, what if we meditate, do the CE5 protocols, but visualize a very specific crop circle and ask the ETs to make it, like right now. So we did. And guess what? They did. This is one of my props for today. This is from a Japanese temple that's very ancient, very, very old temple. And it's exactly the shape in 3 dimensions. This has been around for, I don't know, thousands of years probably, that a member of our team, Greg Sullivan in Japan, sent me. And it's from a temple in Japan, and this is their symbol. And so he got this for me. It has bells in it. Beautiful. But that's what I had never seen this till recently. That's what we visualized and sent up to the crop circle makers, the ones responsible for that operation. And a farmer, when it was like barely dawn, a few hours later, found exactly what we had visualized in a field near where we were.
Wow. And
so that's when so we continued to do that. And that same time is when that 100-foot diameter disc landed or hovered about 10 feet in the field where we were. And we signaled to it, it started floating over towards us. Unfortunately, there was someone on our team who freaked out, became afraid, and it stopped, and then backed off, and then went up into the clouds and just hung around up in the sky as an amber object for about an hour, hour and a half. But the whole time it was there, it was really interesting. As it was moving very slowly counterclockwise, the compass I had was moving with it counterclockwise. Wow. And it had this magnetic torsion effect. It was so cool. But there was this woman who was it turned out she was a UFO person, which was a mistake, who had done a lot of stuff with the abduction groups. And she, just beneath her conscious awareness, had taken into her belief system all this frightening, negative alien stuff. Yeah. And that craft appearing triggered that. Right. And as soon as the ETs sensed her fear, they stopped. Right. And I tell people, I've been doing this for 30 years, and actually since I was 18 for 45 years, 46 years. And one way that you can tell it's an ET and not a covert operation masquerading as ETs is that the actual ETs, if they sense you are uncomfortable and afraid, they back off. Right. We've seen this a bazillion times. Whereas a covert military human project that looks like it's alien, that's a false flag, a deceptive operation, they're going to keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. They're not going to back off. Right. That's how you know. People say, that sounds pretty, crazy. I said, yeah, but that's exactly, what there's a part of this film where talking, someone from the Air Force says, yeah, we've done these abductions and here's why. So I think that we have to understand that. So the whole disclosure movement was a result of first having the intelligence community realize that this group of people, just sort of on their own, had begun to push out into the world the ability to bypass the entire government and all these covert programs. And this is why I say the CE5 initiative is the ultimate cosmic civil disobedience program for Earth, because it's everyone coming together saying, CIA, Pentagon, covert programs, corporations, see ya, wouldn't want to be ya. We're not going to dance to your tune anymore. We're going to do this on our own. And that's, I'm telling you, is the most powerful thing people can do. Yeah. It's a virtual cosmic storming of Area 51, but nonviolent, not with your physical bodies trying to batter down a fence. This is the real cosmic disclosure. It's humans making contact. But to get to that, what I realized from 93 until 98 was, number one, no president was going to make this happen. Yeah. Number two, the Congress was going to be stood down from it. Number three, the United Nations, because I briefed the senior United Nations people, the wife of the UN Secretary General, et cetera. None of them were going to take this on. And then that's why I went public with the Disclosure Project, to not only show what a problem we were in governance, but to also put forward military and government documents and evidence so people would begin to realize this is real and not just something for the National Enquirer. Because without enough people understanding through the Disclosure Project and then unacknowledged that this is real, if you don't think it's real, you're not going to go out and make contact. This is obvious. So I've had to work this system. I've had to go, step one was me starting off with the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative. I quickly realized we had a huge problem of governance, but also a vacuum out there in public understanding that had to be corrected. And here we are now, 20 some years later, after I briefed the CI director, it's been 26 and a half years, where I've come to realize we have got to figure this out in a systematic way. And that's what I've been working on for these quarter of a century. And now it's time for millions and millions of people to understand consciousness, understand they can become very centered in consciousness. They can become points of coherence. All of us doing that together will create what we call this Maharishi effect, where 1% of us aligning in coherence moves all of society into a beautiful state of enlightenment and orderliness very quickly. And that the movement has to be from within, but a lot of people doing it all over the world.
Beautiful response, Dr. Greer. I appreciate that. So we've got so many questions coming in. Let's keep them rolling because there's a lot of topics. This one is actually from one of your fellow team members, Russell Freeman. Mm-hmm. And he wants to know about, he says, can you please ask Dr. Greer about suppressed medical applications of UFO-level transdimensional science and technology to help the corona crisis? Do these technologies exist, and could they use them to help us if they wanted to?
They being who? The ETs?
The ETs, or are there humans that have these types of technologies?
Sure. I mean, look, I'm saying this as a doctor, and I have a healthy respect for things we can do. I also know that our bag of therapies as a doctor is 1/10 full, because the sciences and technologies that have been around for decades in classified projects are not allowed to be used. And what you have to understand when you start getting into energy medicine and very subtle trans-dimensional physics and electronic systems is that you can absolutely make any virus or bacteria, what have you, just basically dissolve through the correct frequencies in electronics. The problem with those being disclosed to the public in this crisis is that the same technologies applied in a slightly different way would give you free energy, which means the end of the petrodollar system, the end of oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, public utilities. Now, that's more than $1,000 trillion in financial and commodity assets that will vanish. So you think the few trillion we lost in the stock market's a lot? This is one of the problems, is that we have gone so far suppressing these things that our civilization is addicted to the very technologies that are not only killing us and the planet, but are also keeping away from the public the technologies that would heal us and the planet. So it's a double whammy, which is why contact and disclosure is so important. Everyone thinks this is a fringe issue. It isn't. Because think about it, if the most important scientific discoveries in 100 years have been ruthlessly suppressed, which they have been, it really means we don't really have a free market economy. We don't have a free press. We don't have the technologies that would help us not only combat, but make an epidemic like this vanish very quickly. And I know for a fact that those technologies exist. I don't have them. And anyone, I can tell you, if anyone at MIT or Caltech or Harvard or wherever stumbles across this, it's known the instant they do, and they have those technologies confiscated under a national security order, NSO. I know people that has had that happen to them. Now, if anyone has such a technology, I've been saying, pass it on to me. I'm willing to go to prison. I'm willing to be killed. And I will put it open source on the internet for millions of people to see. That hadn't happened yet, but I'm willing to do it. But it's got to be something that isn't snake oil. It's got to be something that's rigorously, provably true. But I'm just saying, in terms of answering this person's question, absolutely those technologies already exist, and we don't need them from the ETs. Moreover, as I said last time I was on this YouTube live seminar, if the ETs were to do this in a way that it was them doing it, it would immediately be seized on by the spinmeisters, not just at TTSA, but by governments all over the world as Alien Invasion Week on the History Channel. You see what I'm saying? Writ large. So the ETs know that we have to lead this. We have the knowledge, we have the technologies, we've suppressed it. But for the most part, people don't want to do it. I would say that the billionaires that I've met are terrified of being assassinated. And unfortunately, the everyday average person doesn't want to help. They just want to be entertained by this. And I don't say that in a bitter way. I'm just saying as a matter of fact way. I'm very grateful, by the way, to all the people listening who contributed to our crowdfunding campaign at ce5film.com. But that's less than 4,000 people. You know, this webcast will probably have a couple 100,000 people see it. If only 10% of those people went and contributed $10 at ce5film.com, we would have enough to just push this information out and bury the mainstream media that keeps suppressing it.
Yeah.
But people have to actually go there and do that. So I say this in a slightly chiding way, only to say that we collectively have the world that we have created. And the future world that we want, a world of free energy, peace, interstellar contact and travel, all of that we can do within our lifespan, by the way. But we have to come together and do it. It isn't going to be done by the president, and it isn't going to be done by Elon Musk. It isn't going to be done by some billionaire. It's going to have to be done by a people's movement from the ground up, because that's the only way it can happen. And unfortunately, I've tried every other way. I've met with a whole lot of billionaires who know all this is real. They're too afraid to do it. They feel they'd be too big of a target. Same thing with politicians. But the average person can do this. So you see, if 1 million people realize this and each of them put in $10 a month, do the math, there'd be $100 and some million that we could open the state-of-the-art lab and develop both medical and free energy technologies that we would never patent. I mean, my vow, and I've said this for a very long time, it'd be open source. As soon as there was a discovery, the whole lab would be live streamed like this. it would go on the internet to millions of people. That's what we would do, but we have to have the public support to do it. So in the meanwhile, what I'm trying to do is to create the ground for that to happen by augmenting and bringing up human consciousness, making consciousness of all of humanity rise upward to where enough people awaken where that can happen. So that's why I think this documentary is by far the most important work that we've done, because on the success of the Disclosure Project and Unacknowledged, now there are enough people that we can reach through this, where the activation of human consciousness, and within human consciousness, cosmic consciousness can happen. And that's where everything will begin to really take off vertically, incredibly.
That's a great response, Dr. Greer. So do a couple more questions here. And I just want to remind everyone, we are going to be doing a live meditation at the end of this event, probably maybe 30 minutes most. We'll hit that. So please tune in, get all your friends here. We want to get group coherence. We want to reach that 1%. One more question here regarding the New World Order, Dr. Greer, from Chadwick55. This is a question we get a lot. Why would a group, a shadow government, release something deadly in society? If, don't they face the same repercussions as us if they destroy the economy and the planet? How are they immune from the repercussions of these negative actions?
They've already gamed all these things out, and they have facilities and solutions that I just spoke about where they wouldn't be affected. And, I've sat with enough powerful people who are part of this majority intelligence committee or cabal, whatever you want to call it, who are, their worldview is they're the chosen ones and the rest of us are expendable. And they're just weird. I don't know how to put it any other way. A number of them are weird end of the world freaks, like Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein, who told me, gee, if the reason I'm funding all the abduction groups and giving them all this money is because if we can get enough people to hate the aliens, we can have an interplanetary war. So most of humanity is destroyed. So Jesus will return. Now, he's not the only prominent person who has said this to me in a private meeting. I mean, it's frankly, excuse my language, batshit crazy, but that's, a lot of the thinking. The other part of the thinking is how do we control a maximum number of people, sort of a statism or fascism view, under the condition that they're afraid of something, that we can control them completely. So this is, I think, more of a fascistic view of it. And remember, Paul Mellon and Alan Dulles and these people who founded the CIA at the end of World War II, those were avowed supporters of fascism and Hitler before World War II was officially declared. Now, I'm friends with one of Paul Mellon's grandsons, and who has told me this personally. So I think that people have to understand you have some very strange ideologies that run the gamut from fascism and control to sort of an end of the world weirdness, what I call hyper religiosity. Yeah. In psychiatry, a lot of people who are a little bit crazy have this hyper religiosity as opposed to spirituality. And that you get into these fanatical and crazy cults of belief systems, which frankly, it's what most organized religions devolve into at some point, or have extreme branches of them, kind of the lunatic fringe. So they actually believe they're doing the work of God by doing that kind of stuff. So that's how. I know it sounds strange, and my wife and I often wander around our house and go, a phone call will happen, or me, and they will say, "You can't make this stuff up." And if it had been a reality TV show where someone could have had the meeting, been on the meeting, been a fly on the wall, or had it live streamed, it would have crashed everyone's view of the world and reality. And we're dealing with people, the real folks who have these sort of connections in the world. So I've learned to just kind of roll with that. Yeah. It is personally very stressful, but I deal with it by doing my own way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
Meditation, having fun, being with dogs, being out in nature. By the way, the wonderful expression, the best way to love God is to love his creation. It's, I think, from the Persian. So that the idea is that if you look at the beauty of nature and of the stars, of the natural creation, it's the outer garment of the creative force, the conscious creative force, as opposed to man-made stuff. So I think people forget how beautiful, but also how deeply spiritual just the natural world is. Not only the stars and other worlds, but this planet and life and the oceans and the forests and the animals, because they're pure. They're not contrived. There's no guile. So that's a beautiful thing. And I think the more people can connect to that in whatever way you do, is wonderful, because that's how I first found deep spirituality, because I was raised in a family of agnostic atheists that didn't believe in anything. But I found it through my communing and oneness with nature and the beauty of nature in the Blue Ridge Mountains.
How beautiful. And that is, of course, what the movie is all about. It's about learning to make contact, the origins of CE5, and how you can empower yourself to go out there every night or in the daytime and have that connection through these protocols. And
anytime, anywhere. This is what's beautiful. You don't have to be on a team with me. And one of the things I always say to people is, I love when I was interviewing a meeting with, I think it was Lori Williams, who does a lot of the remote view training. Shout out to her. She's great. She's not in the film because we just ran out of space for everyone we met with. But one of the points that she made, and I think she makes this point in Third Eye Spies. Yeah, it's a documentary that was done, came out last year, I believe. And she makes the point that when they've done studies, they're the people who are the identified experts in remote viewing. But then they did a study where they just pull people off the street, give them a few simple instructions, and the everyday person on the street was as good at doing it as the ones who were the preferred experts.
Right.
And I remember having this conversation with, many of you may know the name of a guy named Ingo Swann.
Sure.
Who was a big supporter of what we were doing. I have a beautiful letter from him.
Wow.
Where he writes about how what we're doing with CE5, this is back in the 90s before he passed away, is really what he wished he had done, instead of getting involved with the intelligence community that sort of just played on him. But that he, had these amazing abilities. But he and I used to talk about it, and I said, everyone has this ability. They just don't embrace it. There's nothing special about me or Ingo or what have you. What's special is that every single human and ET are conscious and sentient and can be aware of awareness. And through that, whatever you've heard the greatest remote viewer or psychic or seer that ever exists on the planet has done, you can do. Wow. Every single one of you. Wow. And we are programmed, because we tend to like kind of cults of personality, which is often why I'm sort of, well, not vulgar, but sort of brusque. And I don't like that. I think it's very inappropriate to have idolatry of a person. You can respect someone as a teacher, but it devolves into these weird cults.
Right.
And I think that's extremely deleterious to human evolution, because what people are doing, they're giving up the responsibility to be what they can be by idolizing someone else as if they can't do it. When in reality, whatever you've heard that any of these people have ever done, everyone listening right now can do. Absolutely, 100%. And you need to embrace that. So long as you believe that you can't, you won't.
Right.
And I have found that the difference between people who can really do CE5 and meditate and have these experiences is the people who actually have a positive attitude that say, oh, I can do that. And because they tell themselves they can, they do.
Right.
But if you're of a mindset, oh, I can't do that, only Ingo Swann can, or Dr. Greer, or whoever.
Right.
It's rubbish.
Right.
Total rubbish. So the studies have demonstrated, and this is why I love when Lori spoke of this in Third Eye Spies, is that it turns out that everyone has this ability if they give themselves to it. There is a little bit of discipline and process, and there are different techniques, but it isn't as if someone can do it and someone can't.
Right.
And the people who say that's the case are just trying to create some kind of cult of personality or something.
Yeah.
I think it's actually very, very destructive. I think it's more important that everyone says we're all unique individuals in where we are, but in our potential, we are all the same. Not what we've expressed. I mean, I did have the opportunity to be a renegade enough when I was 18, 19, 20, my early 20s, to spend 8 hours a day meditating and studying the Vedas and going all over the world before I went into medical school, because I was a renegade and I wanted to do something different than what I was supposed to do. You know, as soon as someone says this is what you should do, I'm doing the opposite. I'm a contrarian. But I've always been a renegade. But I think that most people buy into this and limitations. But if you put a limitation on yourself, you've put yourself in that cage. And so who has the key? Not me, you. You have the key to unlock your own potential. The most I can do is take you through some knowledge, wisdom, maybe give you some techniques, and then you experiment with it. And as soon as you experiment with it in a way of, I can do this, absolutely, you're going to find that there is a positive feedback loop where your skill at remote viewing and CE5 in contact is going to go straight up like this.
Right.
You got to believe in yourself.
Right.
You got to believe in yourself to do it.
Well said. And that is, of course, what the movie is all about, the history of CE5 and how to teach it and the incredible examples of the phenomenon that has been documented.
Right, exactly. Well, when you see, folks, when you see what's in this movie, you're going to go, oh my God. It's just like the things, the images, the CE5, not only just the spacecraft and what happens, but the stories behind some of the intimate contact that's happened. And you realize that all those things are things that other people have done, many of them without me even being there, which is, I'm one of these people who, I love the idea that people can do these things if I was in a cave and no one even knew who I was. I like leading meditation. We're going to do that. But I actually get really happy when I hear somebody in some remote part of the world in Africa was practicing the CE5 protocols and had this amazing contact experience happen. That really makes me happy.
For sure. For sure.
I can't be everywhere at once.
In CE5, which is also narrated by Jeremy Piven, opening the movie, Jeremy Piven quotes and he says, "This is the CE5 protocols are the most dangerous information Dr. Greer has released to the public yet." Why would he say that, Dr. Greer, about the CE5 protocols?
Because this is how we're going to completely stand down the fascist, unacknowledged special access projects, secrecy, but also those interests that have thwarted human enlightenment and human civilization development for probably a century at least. That by doing this and coming together in mass consciousness, we can absolutely break away. And it's sort of like, without leaving our world, we're in a sense are creating this 1% breakout civilization, transformation civilization, that as we gather together and do that, it's going to then suddenly bring the entire planet along. So that's why this 1% effect, where 1% of people in coherence, as you hit that number, the entire population becomes more peaceful and orderly and enlightened and conscious. And actually, with the studies that have been done in neuroscience, they found that people's IQs go up as they meditate more and more. You actually go higher than your birth IQ that's been measured when you were younger. Your intelligence, they've actually found that neurons, which are the cells in the brain, the dendrites and axonal connections, the sort of ways that neurons connect, those increase. So when you're in a meditative state, those are actually being enlivened. So like when we meditate in a few minutes, just know that as you go into meditation, you are actually enlightening, awakening, and making connections even in your physical brain. And this has been measured of neuroscience, MRI studies. So it's really exciting. And when you think about millions of people doing that, where we now have the science to show the power of the conscious field, and that the science of consciousness is a real science that's been known, of course, for millennia in other cultures, but that in our civilization today, we've actually been able to document and prove the power of consciousness on the communities we live in. And that alone, I'm not going to make any claims here, but that alone could greatly change the course of this pandemic.
Yeah.
By people doing it.
Thank you, Doctor. And that actually leads me to our next question from Scott Howard here. And it says, what are steps to shifting reality right now? What can people do to shift reality right now, given this epidemic?
Well, the most important thing to shift reality is to go into the meditative state, but do it together and with increasingly large numbers of people. That's what we're talking about, because mass consciousness, a single person, they've done studies, has a certain effect. Two people that are united, love each other, is not 2 times the effect, it's 10 times the effect.
Wow.
So imagine if at some point we can build this, what do we call this thing? YouTube live thing, to where all at once we have 1 million people doing this. And then we begin to focus on certain, not only state of consciousness, but then from that state, view certain outcomes, view in a positive way, healing things. That I think you'd be astounded at the effect it would have. And that's been proven. Dr. Larry Dawsey, who's I think an internist in Dallas, wrote a book, Recovering the Soul, many, many years ago, in the 90s, 80s maybe. But he studied people in meditative but also prayerful states, and what's called intercessionary prayer, where they would be very far away and may not even know the person. They'd be just told about the person. And they would ask to do a meditation and a prayer that they could measure the effect on that person. But what if all of us did that for the human body, but all of us, all 8 billion people, and Gaia, the living organism known as Earth, this living, organic, connected, conscious organism. So here's another thing that most people don't think about. We're conscious, but so is the Earth. Now, the Earth is not a human, but she is a female. She is absolutely a conscious, living, awake being. And we can connect with her through our own consciousness, because consciousness is a singularity. As the famous physicist Erwin Schrödinger said, the total number of minds in the universe is 1. And this has been proven. It's a singularity. All of us are disconnected from each other through the illusion, Maya, it's called, of separation. But in reality, I'm awake right now. You're awake right now. You're a unique individual. I'm a unique individual. But the awareness whereby we are awake, that which enables us to be conscious, that is 1. And that's mine. Think about that. Everyone listening, thousands and thousands of people, there's actually 1 conscious field that is enabling you to be awake. So to go into quiet state and connect to that, and then you're connecting to everything, is very, very powerful. But it's also very healing, because it's this expansion. It opens the heart and mind together in a way that the body is really healed. Your body, and once we radiate that out, other bodies, other people, and the body of the Earth, the conscious living being of the Earth. So I'm giving you a preview of the meditation I'm going to do.
It sounds wonderful. It sounds wonderful, Dr. Greer. So, I think we can stay up on 4 o'clock.
Let me show you this strange thing. Here it is. Let me put this up here.
What are we looking at, Dr. Greer?
Well, this was an ET, an extraterrestrial, appeared with right next to the head of the naval research, the chief scientist of the naval research labs, and his son, and drew this amazing shape. It's kind of toroidal, but it's got a really thin spine, but it's like a Mobius strip, but it's not. It's much more complex. See there, the one view. Here's the side view. Here's the other. It looks just like that, but it's a continuous. Now, it took them through CAD CAM years to accurately create this, believe it or not, at the Naval Research Labs. And before this man died, he gave this to me. It probably should, if anyone has an extrusion, stainless steel extrusion system where we could laser, now we have technology, we could laser do this and 3D print it out, but in metal, stainless steel or something. You should make a great big one. And I'll put it out in front of my farm in the house and it can whirl around, see what happens. Maybe we'll go into another dimension. I don't know. But the ET very specifically said it had something to do with the energy and propulsion components.
Wow.
And by the way, this scientist was very much in sync with us, very much supportive. And I think that's why that contact event happened, because they knew this guy. I would have never been able to either reproduce or draw this, but isn't it cool?
That is
So cool. This is the only one remaining that I know of in the world. So I wanted people to show it in case my house burns down or something. But isn't it cool?
It's so cool.
Yeah. Anyway,
sharing that
story behind that. It was a little show and tell. This house is chock full of strange things.
I'm sure. Yeah. So I thought you would share maybe one last context story from the movie, then we could go into the meditation. I thought it might be interesting for the viewers to hear the story of Ed Moen and what he went through in CE5.
Oh, what a beautiful soul. Yeah. I think people, I can say that what I'm going to share with this story has happened many, many, many times. The unique thing about this is that we actually have a photograph of the ET that's not been photoshopped, nothing. It's just there it is. So we were up in a place in Arizona, little community called Oracle, ironically, like the Oracle of Delphi. And we were doing one of these week-long retreats with me, where I was teaching people in the afternoon what we do. For those of you who want to come in the future, we could train everyone in meditation, remote viewing, the Vedas, science of consciousness, very advanced concepts during the day. And then at night, we apply those and do our group meditations with cameras and sitting out under the stars till 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Well, I tell the babies, I call them the babies, the new people, they can go to bed at 1, but the hardcore folks stay up till 3 or 4. And I'm an emergency doctor who was accustomed to working 36 hours straight without break. So, fine, we'll do it. Crazy, but hey, that's my life. But it was so beautiful because this man, he had no hearing without assistant hearing aids since he was in middle school or high school. And Ed is an entrepreneur, lives up in the Midwest, and he came on one of these trainings, and it was partway through the week, and we were doing, the meditations for remote viewing, and then the coherent thought sequencing protocols. All these are going to be in the new app. It's not on the stores yet, but it's going to be called CE app, and it should be available April 7th, fingers crossed, globally on iTunes and Google. It's going to be really cool, this app. But what we're going to do, what we were doing with all these protocols, and then, after a while, people can't be in a meditative state for 4 or 5 hours. So we take a little break, and we were all sitting around, but we were in this meditation, and we had heard in a meditation, this being walking behind me, right behind me. We're in a circle. And several people heard it. And I have a friend, Robbie, who's a medical student beside me, and next to him was this man, Ed. And I went, wow, they're here. And so there's a very well-known screenwriter named David Marconi, who wrote Enemy of the State with Will Smith. Those of you who've seen the movie, you look it up. And he has a great camera. And I don't do cameras because I would just break them. I break everything. I'm not good with machines, except respirators and defibrillators. But So I said, David, there's something over here. So he had his camera facing right over towards me that then extended a couple of people over to where Ed was. And suddenly, what we saw with the naked eye was like a ruby red teardrop shaped object that came right between Robbie and this man, Ed Moen. And a whole bunch of people saw it, but it was very quick, bang. But with the naked eye and like a beautiful ruby crimson red object. The film, it was a digital camera lens, was open at that instant. And because of the light cells and sensitivity of these new digital cameras, it showed this entire 5-6 foot tall ET that had this triangular face right next to Ed that was wearing like a tunic. And you'll see this in the movie. And Ed Moen started to continue to have a connection with this ET that even after the group left that night, he continued on throughout the wee hours of the morning. And at some point he was doing this. He was called to go back outside. He'd gone back into his room after we broke circle. And he was just told intuitively to go out. So he did. And he saw this red object again, began to connect with it. And he said, and he was doing this to be an ambassador, but then he just sort of innocently said, and by the way, I have such a hard time hearing. I've not had proper hearing since I was a teenager. If you could do something about this, it'd be great. And the next morning he woke up with normal hearing. Now, this guy had 40, 50 years of really severe hearing loss. And he literally took his hearing aids out, never has worn them since. And so I tell people that the key thing here is that people are going to immediately hear this story and jump to, oh, I'm going to go do CE5 because I want to be healed. No. Sure. If you do it for that, they're going to say, no, you're in the wrong headspace. He was doing it out of a pure-hearted intention to be an ambassador to these civilizations and put himself at service to the greater good. But in that context, he then parenthetically said, will you help me with this? And they did. You see the difference?
100%.
He had gone out there and said, God damn it, I've come all this way. I want you to fix my hearing. Never gonna happen.
Sure.
All right, never gonna happen. So people need to hear what I'm telling you. There's a importance is the pure-heartedness, the purposefulness, the motive. Where are you in your head and heart? And if that's clear, I'll tell you, absolutely anything is possible. But you've got to be in that space first. That's the prerequisite. It's just like the prerequisite to being an interstellar civilization is that our civilization is peaceful. We're not going to be welcome out there if we go out there with weapons and with this mindset, this tribalistic mindset of us versus them. No, that is a deal breaker. That's why there's basically, you talk about quarantine. For decades, there's been a quarantine around the earth by these ETs not to let humans too far out there because we haven't become peaceful. We're not civilized. We're not a level 1 civilization that's living peacefully and in a non-harmful way to our planet or to each other or to potentially other worlds out there. And remember, there are entire planets out there that are very advanced that don't even have a word in their vocabulary for war. They just don't. So we are considered a high-risk place. And if you doubt it, look around. Yeah. Tell people, come to my emergency department on a Saturday night. So I just think that you have to look at this in a way that is realistic. But if you're in the right place spiritually and in your heart and mind, anything can happen. Healing for yourself, healing for the planet.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. So I would recommend that that's how we go into this meditation. We go into this meditation with something that, while there may be some enlightened self-interest for ourselves, that we begin to, in an expanded way, be more concerned about the greater good, the world, the cosmos, altruism, healing. I think that we need to get into that pure-hearted place and understand the technique of consciousness and meditation, and then anything is possible. It's just beautiful what can happen.
Well said, Dr. Greer. So let's segue into the meditation. I think it's the perfect time. Everyone.
Yeah, let's do that. I think it's been on. Oh my goodness, it's longer than I thought.
Almost 2 hours. Yep.
All righty. Well, look. Okay, so in the next 15 seconds, everyone tweet or send a message out to all your friends to jump on this live stream. So we have a big mass meditation right now, and just let everyone know now we're going to do it. Wherever you are, whatever time zone. So I'm going to close my eyes. So if we can close our eyes all together, and I'll lead this meditation after you've contacted your friends to jump on this live stream. Okay, so now with our eyes closed, let us become aware of the mind that is hearing the voice. And sense that you are conscious and awake, but that the mind whereby you are awake is one. And that everyone meditating right now can sense that they are awake and feel in their heart that we are connected all together in this great spirit. And now let us take some deep cleansing breaths, and in with our nose and out with our mouth. And with each inward breath, see your mind expanding and of great light in the center of your forehead, expanding. And as we exhale, feel yourself becoming relaxed, and exhale fully and release into the purifying breath of Mother Earth all of your limitations, all of your worries, all of your concerns and fears, all that withholds you from oneness, and see them dissolve and vanish. And with each inward breath, we become more expanded and aware of this infinite mind within us. And with each exhalation, we become more calm and centered and at peace. Now, let us become aware that the conscious mind, whereby we are observing our own breath, our thoughts, the voice, your body, that conscious mind is like an infinite ocean. And all these perceptions and all that exists in the creation, whether you perceive it or not, are like waves and ripples moving on this infinite ocean of mind, cosmic consciousness. And as such, all that exists is made of the same consciousness stuff of the vast ocean of awareness. And we become aware that our bodies, the earth, ourselves, the stars, the photons, all life, all that exists. All of this is emanating and manifesting from this unbounded conscious mind, which is the consciousness within us. It is never far away. It is always the essence of our being. Knowing this, let us very gently go deep in this quiet mind and let go of the surface of perceptions and thoughts, neither pushing them out nor embracing them, but relax and become aware of this infinite ocean of consciousness within us. And now go more deeply still. And it is pure light and consciousness. It is unbounded by space or time. It is unlimited and infinite. And because it is unbounded and infinite, it is at its fullness in every point in space and at every point in time. Because it is indivisible. It is the singularity. It is the oneness. It is the core and root of our being. Being thus aware of the true nature of our own consciousness, let us now see that our bodies are filled with this conscious energy and light. And see that the earth itself, that she is an awake, conscious being. And wherever you are sitting, see the energy and consciousness of the earth coming up through your bodies, through your chakras, into your mind, and then up through yourself into the world and space around us. With a steady vision, see that we are inseparable from the earth and one another. And we can see this conscious light and healing energy come up through us and heal each of us, and then open your heart and mind and see that field of pure conscious energy and healing spread to all those in the communities around you, washing away all that harms, denaturing and removing all that makes ill. And see in the heart of your compassion all those who are in illness, healed, enlightened, cleansed by this infinite pure ocean of conscious light. And as we stay with this meditation, let us very gently become aware that consciousness, the mind whereby you are awake right now, isn't limited to your body, but is in fact omnipresent. And because it is omnipresent, let us quietly intend, without straining, to rise upward above ourselves into the community above us. And let us see the countryside or the city around us. And as we rise upward into the sky, we send blessing and healing and light and love to all those around. And then as we rise further, we go higher effortlessly into the sky above us. And now we can see for hundreds of miles above the earth, and then thousands of miles as we rise upward through the atmosphere. And as we gain great altitude in our vision, we see in the center of our vision the entire earth. Our Mother Earth is an awake, conscious being. And she loves us, and we love her. And her love is the most pure and unconditional love. And we return that to her infinite love back to the earth and to her children, all who dwell on earth. And we feel that and we see it. And then we rise further into Father Sky, and we see Father Sky all around us. And it is infinite. And in truth, the cosmos has no beginning nor end, nor does consciousness. And so, as within ourselves, this infinite ocean, we are also one with the infinite cosmos. And as we gently float out into space, we behold the earth and the moon and the sun and Mercury and Venus and Mars and all the planets. And we behold that each and every planet is an awake, conscious being. And some are male and some are female, but they are all awake. And they are spinning in an ocean of light that is infinite. And that space itself is one and integrated with this cosmic mind within us. And we are one with that cosmic consciousness. And then in this state, we become aware, without straining, that there are extraterrestrial civilizations, some of whom have representation in our solar system, and some from galaxies very far away. And we connect to them as ambassadors from the earth to their people. And in universal consciousness, we establish universal peace. And we invite them to gaze upon the earth with us in this meditation and ask them to send healing light and energy to the earth. And all beings, both extraterrestrial and celestial in the worlds of light, join us. And we gaze upon the earth with the eye of oneness and behold the earth as this beautiful planet. And there are 8 billion souls who live upon her. And connecting to this infinite cosmic mind and all the beautiful and healing powers of the cosmos, and those are folded within each of us, we gently focus on the earth, and we see a ray from the infinite sun of cosmic being coming into the earth and spreading across the earth, healing the planet and humanity, and bringing us together as one people in one universe. And as we stay with this vision of constant streaming consciousness, we see the earth filled with joy, and the burden we have placed upon the earth being lifted, and humanity brought together. For this is the time of the great transformation, and this is how it will happen. All of us together, we are all one in spirit, in pure consciousness. Namaste. Well, thank everyone for joining us. I'm just coming back. I hope you will all subscribe to the channel so we can kind of be in touch with you and let your friends know. We're going to do these sort of things as often as we can. Thanks to the Moriartys and Jim, I figured out how to use a computer properly so we can do. I'm such an idiot about some things, actually. So I'll admit my weaknesses. But now that I've sort of figured this out, I'm still getting my legs on. We can do this more often and create community. And also when the CE5 contact app comes out, we'll all be able to form teams that will do this all together. So we can, once we're able to, get out under the stars together. So there can be thousands of teams all over the world. And I can do this for thousands of teams with millions of people all at once. And the effect it will have will be astonishing, I think. All around you, you will see the emergence from the crossing point of light and from infinity, these civilizations and peoples joining us as we create a new civilization, a new world. Thank you very much. God bless you all, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.